great conversations over the last 2 days of the role Africa plays, in terms of leveraging economic growth and sustainable economic growth. And Cameroon is obviously a leader in that front. And you have a very all-encompassing national development strategy, and I would like you to shed some light on that. I know that there's some key areas around economic diversification, human capital development, infrastructure development, and of course, good governance, which is so important. So maybe I'll get you to just maybe talk about the importance of these 4 pillars. Why is that important to leverage sort of your growth in investment opportunities, and what are some of these key areas that Cameroon will focus on leading to 2030?
Yeah, thank you so much. Cameroon is one of those countries blessed with extraordinarily poignant leadership. It takes leadership to design a long-term development path for a country, and this is part of the very powerful legacy of President Paul Biya to take a decision to look forward 25 years down the road and to choose where he wants to take the Cameroonian people to. And in that light, he opted to drive Cameroon within a period of 25 years, which is not so short, that's a quarter of a century, to the status of an emerging country. And to do that, he designed and put in place a long-term vision whose thrust is Cameroon, an emerging country, democratic and united in its diversity. This encompasses his dream from an economic perspective, from a social and, why not, political perspective. This wise, looking at the challenges that he thought Cameroon may face in this 25 years period, he tried to package his dream to drive the country to that direction. Now, coming to situating the macroeconomic development of Cameroon within the broader African context, it's good to say that development plans are designed within endogenous and exogenous context, factors of element. When you rub in all of this, when you look at what's happening around the world and what's happening within your own country, you try to bring together your strengths, your weaknesses, your you look at it from a holistic perspective, and you design the path taking into consideration the competitive advantages that you may have, not leaving out the possible challenges that you may face. It is good to know Africa is developing within a world which is focused on the sustainable development goals. Sustainable development goals that are broken down to the African level and ultimately are adapted to national contexts. This wise, Cameroon can only participate in the concept of nations, especially given one of President Biya's main thrusts, which is laying emphasis and importance on multilateralism. He emphasizes on that. That effect, we know that we can't develop alone. We have to develop alongside the other African countries.
Sorry, sir, just one moment. It's too much noise. Sorry, sir, we'll continue. That's really rude.
So Cameroon can only develop alongside the other African countries because there is an African dream which is structured over a period of 50 years from 2013 to 2063, there is an African Union vision for the continent. Cameroon, therefore, designs its path to emergence, taking into consideration the global Sustainable Development Goals and the Africa 2063 dream for the Africa we want. To this effect, continental integration, be it at the level of the African continent or sub-regional integration, which are intended to get together to realize the continental dream, is a major motivation for Cameroon. One of our key components, one of the key strengths of our strategy is regional integration. Why is regional integration so important? It is important because Cameroon is a country with 30 million inhabitants, or thereabout. We consider this, from this angle, to be a micronation. And of course, you even realize that there are many countries in Africa who have much smaller populations, 1 million and some even less. It is only by getting together as a continent of 1.4 billion inhabitants that it makes macroeconomic sense to design the path of development for everybody. So Cameroon naturally is in favor of an African perspective within which Cameroon will play its role so that together we can pull the continent forward. And from this angle, I think one of the important deliveries or outcomes of the African Union dream has been the African continental free trade area. As a believer in multilateralism, Cameroon immediately signed and ratified this agreement and is ready to play its role to accompany the continent, deliver on the expected outcomes of this. Top amongst which is the development of the various value chains which the continent is fully endowed with, without which we will continue to depend on others for our survival, for our growth, for our collective well-being. So Cameroon within the continent of Africa, ready to play its part, to lift the continent, and of course to enjoy the benefits of being part of the continent.
It's so important, obviously, to talk about sustainable development and what that would look like, and how that translates into the lives of Africans. But I guess at the end of the day, for every African, a vision is a vision, a strategy is a strategy. What does this mean for the everyday lives of ordinary Africans? How does this translate into, bread and butter issues for them? How does this improve their lives?
The advantage of having a strategy is that you have a leadership instrument. Leadership instrument in the sense that everybody clusters around a strategy if it has to be delivered. Benchmarks are set in a strategy, especially at the national level, from a sectoral perspective. And we have monitoring mechanisms in place in Cameroon which permit us to actually quantify the road covered within each period. And of course you are so right, strategies are dreams, structured dreams, but it's also important that when we get up from sleep in the morning, we should be able to find some elements of satisfaction that we delivered on what the strategy expected us to deliver on. The National Development Strategy 2020-2030 of the Republic of Cameroon has set out its priority areas. But first and foremost, the strategy has opted to change the narrative in terms of the approach to development. We are focused on economic growth, not for the sake of a figure. But because we think for Cameroon to develop in a way as to benefit the maximum, if not all Cameroonians, we need to grow the size of the economy. And to grow the size of the economy, we know what we need. And we know the potential that we have, on the strength of which we can deliver. As of now, top on our priorities is to promote fast speed industrialization, because we also have a national industrialization master plan as one of the key elements of the national development strategy. Because we believe industrialization is an answer to many of our problems. Our biggest problem, which we consider it as a ticking time bomb, and we give it the importance it deserves, is the youthfulness of the population. More than 60% of the population of Cameroon is under 25. The government has to ensure that not only are they trained and well trained, they are also able to have access to decent and gainful employment. And in this effect, government knows that the public sector definitely can't provide all the answers. The public sector can't on its own create all the jobs that are needed. So the narrative changes within a policy of the structural transformation of the economy by bringing the private sector, sitting the private sector on the driving wheel of the national economy, by giving them what it takes for them to deepen and structure and drive our industrialization process. And this is all dependent on one key factor amongst others, which is energy supply. So we have a lot of focus
On that.
on energy.
Yeah.
Energy, we think, will do three things to the country. First, energy will provide itself to the households. It will improve the quality of life, the standards of living of Cameroonians. Simple access to electricity. It's a factor that on its own can transform the life of a household. But beyond that, energy will enable our industries to churn out the quality goods which we need for our own consumption and, of course, for exportation. And thirdly, energy from the Cameroonian perspective is an exportable commodity. Because we have more than we need. We have way more than we need. And because we are lucky that what we have in terms of energy is clean and green energy, we are confident that we can export this energy as a commodity in itself. So energy in Cameroon will serve these three purposes, and we give a lot of importance to it. Maybe we can stop there in terms of priorities, but the priorities are large. Industrialization, you need to feed the industries. Industries don't run on nothing. They have to run to produce something. Industries add value to the various chains of goods that exist. Our biggest resource so far, besides our human resources, is what you find on the surface, which is our agriculture. We're a heavily endowed country in terms of agroecological network of the, layout of the country. There is a lot that you can grow in Cameroon. We have to be able to intensify our agriculture so as to be able to feed the industries that will turn out what we need to survive as a nation and to participate in the development of the African continent.
My final question to you, sir, is it appears that, of course, Africa has been open for business for decades, and now with the national strategy also for Cameroon and having an open sort of free trade area, it's now doing it on its own terms. So what would your message be to investors, to the Commonwealth nations, now that you have your regulatory frameworks in place, you have strategies, that's for the entire African continent? What would your message be today to investors?
I'd like to look at it a bit differently from you, to say we need stronger commitment from the policymakers to make this continental dream a reality. We're talking about free trade within the African continent. What do we trade in? We trade three things. We trade goods, we trade services, and we trade capital. These are the three things that are traded. None of these three categories of tradables can move on its own. You need people to move with these tradables. Therefore, for the continental free trade area to go operational and to do so optimally, the barriers must come down. When I mean barriers, I mean tariffs, non-tariffs, and what have you. These barriers must come down if we have to trade, if African countries have to trade amongst themselves. I think here we are facing a major public policy decision challenge. It behoves the policy makers to ensure that barriers across nations go down so that the countries of the continent can trade amongst themselves, without which the African continental free trade area will remain just a dream. Luckily, I will tell you, Cameroon is standing out as a shining example on open borders for trade to happen. I will always say Cameroon has a neighbor with a special history, Nigeria, the biggest country on the continent in terms of the size of its GDP and in terms of the size of its population. This is a country where Cameroonians and their neighbors on the other side cross the border on a daily basis without anybody asking them, where are you going to? Free movement between Cameroon, free movement of people, let me be precise, between Cameroon and Nigeria is a perfect example for other African countries to copy. We need that to move forward. For Cameroon and its national development strategy, we obviously know that we can only attain our objectives if and only if the African continent becomes a big and open market for us to grab. And we are confident. The signal that we are getting from the other African countries who are letting down barriers are positive signals which we think will work. But coming back maybe a bit more precisely to your question, specifically to Cameroon, yes, we have the Global Sustainable Development Goals. Today, it is well known. In September 2023, during the United Nations General Assembly, an overall assessment of the realization of the 17 goals of the SDGs was carried out. Then that was midway between 2015 and 2030. And the conclusion is that if something very special doesn't happen, we're not going to attain the Sustainable Development Goals as designed in 2015. One of the key reasons is insufficient funding, insufficient finances to do so. And it's been established that the classical international financial architecture that exists today can't take us there. Meaning we have to retrace the way, we have to revise the international financing architecture if we have to, as a world, as a planet, attain the realization of sustainable development goals. This is from a global perspective. But if you bring it down to a continental perspective, and more so to Cameroon, it's even more glaring that financial resources that exist nowadays in the world are everywhere except where they should be. The needs of African countries in terms of finances are so huge, yet the amount of financial resources that effectively get to Africa are so small. All the needs are in Africa, but the money doesn't get to Africa, which means Africa definitely cannot continue to bank on overseas development assistance, ODA, as has been the case for 50 years.
Yes.
We've been talking about it for 50 years, and not much has changed. The situation of Africa on the ground has remained very much the same. The promise of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is leave no one behind, will only be a dream if the current situation continues to persist. I thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.